Okay, we got something here for the Pokemans today that's a little different. I've had some conversations with some of the people watching these videos, and there've been some comments and some questions and stuff that are really all getting at the kind of basics of getting into Pokemon competitively. So those questions are a little too long to answer just through messaging back and forth. So I'm making a video here, and instead of a workshop on a specific deck, we're going to talk about the basics of how do you play Pokemon competitively. Because what a lot of people do when they start out in Pokemon is they see a starter deck and they go, oh, that makes sense, I can do that, cool. And that's not it. Let's take a look at this starter deck here. What do we have? 23 Pokemon, 17 trainers, 20 energies. Okay? The reason that this gives people the wrong idea is because the number of cards in here are all completely wrong. 20 energy? That is insane for like 90% of decks. I'm going to put my phone on vibrate because I just realized it was making noise during the video. Okay, anyways, 20 energy in a deck. That is insane for 99% of competitive decks. That is way too many. 17 trainers. That is way too few. Trainers are the meat of your deck. If you do not have enough trainers, then you are just going to be sitting there hoping that the next card you draw is good enough to get what you need. Trainers are all about deck manipulation, and there's a few types that we're going to get into here. And then Pokemon, this is just all over the place with the Pokemon in here. Furfrou? Guys, Furfrou. Okay, anyways, that's the point there. So the starter decks do not give you a good idea of how a competitive deck works. And a brand new player looking at Pokemon cards will probably see a competitive deck list for the first time and be really confused because they are very, very different. So let's take a look at Charizard as a different example. 13 Pokemon, 12 energy, and 35 trainers. You see how different those numbers are? Now, I know the most recent video with Charizard was not good. That was a bit of bad luck, though, which can happen to anyone, no matter how good you are. This is a much more realistic estimate of about where you're going to be. Typically, it's 20 or less Pokemon, at most like 14 energies, but even that is pretty freaking high. And then around half your deck, if not more, is all trainers. Okay? So because trainers are the meat of a competitive deck, I am going to start with that. I mentioned that there are a few different types of trainers. First things first, your draw supporters. Draw supporters are things like Cynthia. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. Things like, what else do I have in here for draw supporters? I've got Lily. Draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. If it's your first turn, draw until you have 8. Draw supporters, you want typically 6 to 8 of those. Excuse me. Sometimes, now in Standard now, a card that used to be a staple in every deck, this is an expanded deck, so I have Versus Seeker, put a supporter from your discard pile into your hand. Versus Seeker is no longer in Standard, so I've noticed, now that I've come back to the Pokemon game, that people are running a bit more than 6 to 8 draw supporters. They might be running 8 to 10, because they don't have access to Versus Seeker anymore to get those supporters out of the discard pile for them. But if you're playing expanded format, if you have your hand on some Versus Seekers, that gives you a good place to start. Next, we have hunting cards. These are cards that search out the crap you need. Nest Ball, basic Pokemon, put it on the bench. Ultra Ball, discard 2 cards from your hand, search your deck for a Pokemon, stuff like that. Notice that I have 4 Nest Balls and 4 Ultra Balls. So that's 8 out of the 60 cards out of my deck, completely dedicated just to searching for cards. Something that is I'd say like half a staple, the third type of staple trainers that's not in every deck is what's called deck thinners. If you have a lot of cards in your deck, then the chance of you drawing the card you need is very low. If you get rid of the bullcrap, the chance of you drawing the card you need is very high. So that's why actually the consequences of Ultra Ball, having to discard 2 cards, a lot of the times doesn't even matter, because you have cards in your hand that once you see your opponent, once you see what's going on, you know cards in your hand that you don't need. So if you had, say, an Ultra Ball and a Cynthia in your hand, so you know you want to play Cynthia, you know you want to shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. Well, if you have some crap cards in your hand, play that Ultra Ball first, get those cards out of there, shove them in the discard pile, and then they don't get shuffled back into your deck. There's fewer cards in your deck. You have a greater chance of drawing the cards you need. Those are the main staples. There's a variety of other trainers that can help you out depending on what you are trying to do, but the staples are your shuffle supporters, your cards that hunt for stuff, and your deck thinners, which, like I said, deck thinner can come or go depending on the type of deck you're running. So the reason there are so few energies, let's talk about that. If you do not win the game with just a few attacks from the Pokemon that have like 6 to 9 energy attached to them, you've probably lost. And if you are running enough good shuffle supporters, things like that, you don't need a high probability of drawing energies out of your deck. There are some exceptions to this. There are some decks that are based off of a boatload of energy and that run more. This is just in general for competitive. So don't take all of these as absolute fact. There are some exceptions. There are some crazy decks out there. But in general, if you're running the right draw supporters, if you're running the right deck hunters to filter stuff out of your deck, you can only attach 1 energy per turn. So running too many energies is just going to bog down the speed of getting out everything else you need. So that is why when you look at a competitive deck and you see so few energies, there you go. Real quick, I am going to go back to Charizard, but I just want to show another example of just how far that strategy can go. My Swiper deck, my Zoroark GX, 4 energy. That's it. 4 energy, 18 Pokemon, 38 trainers. It's all about the trainers. Okay? Now, some other staples are typically cards that are Pokemon that can fit into any deck regardless of the combo is. You have to think about, do they have abilities that are cool that work in any deck? A great example of that is one that is all over the place right now in Standard and will probably still be Standard legal next year, Jirachi. If this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, reveal a trainer card, put it into your hand. What's that? Is that a searching ability that gets your stuff out of your deck faster? See what I mean? Jirachi getting knocked out is not a big deal. It's not a GX Pokemon. Your opponent only gets 1 prize card. So if you leave this Jirachi out in front, getting that trainer is 9 times out of 10 going to be worth letting your opponent take a prize card off of it. Another one, something like Oranguru, Instruct. You may draw cards until you have 3 cards in your hand. Great passive ability for stuff that you can run. Some other cool things to look at are cards that only use colorless energy in their attacks, or cards that use no energy in their attacks. I'm not using them so much anymore, but for a while, I was running some Alolan Sandslash as a tech card, because it has an attack for 0 energy, Spike Armor, that's pretty good, that can go into any deck because you don't have to attach energy to it. Things like that to help you out. Some other... Let me show you some stuff from Zoroark again. Some other cards that are Pokemon that can help support. Tapu Lele, put it on your hand. Put it from your hand onto your bench. You get to search your deck for a supporter card. It's all about making your deck consistent. That's where all of this is leading to. All the search cards, all the draw, all the cards that are kind of doing the same thing, but you're running multiple copies of them. Your deck should be based around a single mechanic, and everything else in the deck should be around getting that mechanic out as consistently and quickly as possible. That is why for most decks, again, exceptions, some crazy decks out there from crazy creative people, but for the majority of competitive decks, whatever your main strategy is, you're going to be running 4 copies of all of that. I got 4 copies of Zoroark GX in this deck. In my Charizard deck, I've got 4 copies. Because not only does that make it more likely that you will get the card you need by not running too much of a variety to where it just gets bogged down, but you have to also remember that at the start of the match, 6 of the cards in your deck get placed away in prize cards, and you can't touch them until you start knocking out your opponent's Pokemon. And you guys have seen, if you've watched some of my videos, that sometimes the way I've gotten screwed is by too much of the stuff I need in my deck being in my prize cards. So the less copies you run of something, the greater chance you risk of that card being in the prize card. I only run 1 Oranguru because it would be stupid to run more than 1. If that's in my prize cards, it's not a big deal. But I've got 4 Charmander in the deck, 4 Charizard in the deck, because this is my main strategy. This is my win condition. I've only got 1 Victini because I'm only allowed to have 1 Victini. That's how it goes. Alright, so the last piece of advice that I have, I know I've been like talking really fast. I just didn't want this video to drag on, and also because it is a YouTube video, you guys can come back and rewatch this at any point when you feel like it. The thing to think about when you're figuring out what 60 cards are going in your deck is, does this actively help my win strategy? Because there's a lot of cards that are cool or look cool, but when you put them in, they're not really doing anything. This is where it gets a lot more complicated. It takes a lot more just experimenting and messing around, because if I were to go over every possible combo, we would be here for hours, if not days. There are a pretty decent number of decks that are good in Standard, and then in the expanded format, which has way more cards, there's a crazy amount of competitive level decks out there. So I can't really go into detail on this part. But using Charizard as an example. So, my main attacker has to discard all fire energy attached to him every time I attack. Now this is still a very good card because I don't even have to attach them to him. With Roaring Resolve, I search him out of my deck. What's that? I'm thinning my deck so I have a better chance of drawing what I need. See, this keeps coming back. Consistency. Getting what you need out of your deck as fast as possible. Anyways, I'm going to have a lot of energy in the discard pile with this card. So, what do I do to remedy that? Victini is a great example. 20 damage for each basic energy in my discard pile, then I shuffle those cards into my deck. So, I play Charizard, do a few attacks with him. I've got like 6 or 7 of my energy in the discard. I'm almost out. I can't really attack much more. Throw out Victini. Bam, all those energy are back in my deck, and I can just keep repeating with Charizard. I'm also running 1 copy of Energy Recycler. Shuffle 5 basic energy cards from my discard pile into my deck. That is at least 2 more attacks from Charizard that I can pull off by shuffling those energies back into my deck. Pokemon Stretcher. I really only have 1 big attacker, so if I lose him, I might need to get him back. Rescue Stretcher is a staple card in quite a lot of decks nowadays, because it either gets a Pokemon from your discard into hand, or 3 from your discard pile back into your deck. So if there's a Pokemon you're running that's real nasty and your opponent doesn't like it, so they get rid of it, you can Rescue Stretcher, get it back in the deck, and then they have to deal with it again. I have dealt with this myself in both good ways and bad. Stadiums. Stadiums are, again, another pseudo-staple where you will typically run them, but you don't necessarily have to. Stadiums are global effects. There can only be 1 stadium, and if you have a stadium out and your opponent plays one, your stadium automatically goes into the discard pile, which is why it can be good to play stadium cards even if you don't really need them, because you maybe want to shut down whatever your opponent's stadium strategy is. And to be honest, you can typically find stadiums that are good in your deck. So for mine, Shrine of Punishment, all about the combos. My deck has no EX and GX Pokemon, but EX and GX Pokemon are really popular because they're super powerful. Shrine of Punishment between turns slaps a damage counter on each Pokemon in GX, both mine and my opponent's. But this doesn't touch me because I'm not running EX and GX. That's how it goes. I also have 1 copy of Heat Factory. So just in case I need it or want it, either player can discard a fire energy from their hand. If they do, they draw 3 cards. Boom. Card draw, more stuff out of my deck, thin it out, boom jams. Bill's Analysis, get some trainers. I need Rare Candy in order to evolve Charizard because I'm not running any Charmeleon in the deck. So having things like Jirachi and Bill's Analysis help make that more consistent. It gets those trainers out. Blacksmith, get fire energy cards from my discard attached to one of my Pokemon. So I'm basically discarding them and then I get to put them back on for free. Your boy Guzma forces a switch. Great stuff to do. Control your opponent, get out something that they don't want to be touched on the bench. And some Pokemon tools. This helps me retreat Jirachi even if it's asleep. It is a great combo. So those are some of the cards that synergize well and combo with this deck specifically. I'm going to leave it there because, like I said, there's an insane number of competitive decks out there. And we'd be here forever if I tried to show you everything. To sum up here, you have the wrong idea of how competitive Pokemon works if you are looking to starter decks for your inspiration. These kind of numbers that you're seeing here are roughly about the numbers you're going to see. You're going to see about 12 to 20 Pokemon, 6 to 12 or 14 energy, and then around half the deck or more being trainer cards. What do you need for your trainers? Draw supporters, searching cards, deck thinners. It is all about picking one strategy and making that strategy happen as consistently as possible so that no matter what cards you draw from your deck in your opening hand, you have a decent chance of winning. I hope this helped for people who are newer or completely new to Pokemon and they've only been watching stuff from my videos. Speaking of which, I'm not making these videos public. You all know that I'm not forcing any of you to watch these videos, but I mean it honestly when I say watching my videos will probably help you out quite a bit if you are interested in playing Pokemon. Because watching matches, seeing how other decks work, seeing how people use different mechanics is a great help. You learn from losing and you learn from watching. I'm going to leave that here. Hope this was helpful. I'll catch you next time.